you can't impose the curiosity to self-awareness on anybody. And the more you practice, the more it becomes natural. So that when you're in challenging situations, which we all live, we can stay in a space of dignity. As everything in life, the coin has two sides. There's the shadow and there's the light.
Of course.
And I think it's very important that we start to embrace more and more the light into competition. We need to learn how to be vulnerable with ourselves. It's actually the same with others. If I want to be authentic with you, I'm going to have to allow myself to be vulnerable with you.
Welcome to KanaCast, a series of conversations with residents and visitors to Kanha Shantivanam, the International Heartfulness Center near Hyderabad, Telangana, India. In this episode, Karunakar is speaking to Mark Milton. Mark is the founder of Education for Peace, or E4P, which works internationally to promote skills in self-awareness among young people in education and sport. He is also a founding partner of the Spirit of Humanity Forum. Mark was at Kanha Shantivanam for the Global Spirituality Mahotsav in 2024.
March 19th, 2024. Here we are on a grand overcast afternoon, having a chat. Welcome, Mark. It's a delight.
Thank you, Karun. It's shared. Thank you.
I believe you have had a long day and you have had your body absolutely reformed again at the massage center.
Absolutely. Yeah.
How do you feel right now?
Fresh after, as you said, a beautiful massage at the wellness center, but also inspired.
How
inspired by what's been going on here for these last days. Yeah.
So, what are the thoughts going on in your head right now when you say inspiration?
Yeah. So I'll share what's alive now. I'm still, I like to say decanting. I'm still, letting it come down without putting too much thought into it, just letting the heart vibrate with what's been happening. What's happening for me is, it's being inspired about this event and seeing and hearing such amazing diversity of dignitaries, from religious leaders to political leaders, give the same message that we need to unite. There is a space beyond our religions where we can meet.
Of course.
And so that's been very inspiring to not just hear about it, because it's something that many of us has been talking about, this need, since a long time, but actually seeing it manifest has been very inspiring.
I can imagine the work you do with Education for Peace as well. I mean, to be able to focus on awareness and using education to facilitate awareness, it is a fantastic ordeal. There was an entire session over here that was dedicated simply towards deepening your consciousness. I wonder, how do you approach the whole aspect of deepening a consciousness of an individual by working on his awareness?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's a deep question. And of course, there are many answers, because not only depending which part of the world we are in, but also depending our own education, our own life experiences, we will convey and bring this in our own way. So I'll share with you my way of living it and sharing it.
Please do.
For me, it happens a lot through developing our awareness of listening. We've received the gift to listen to each other, but even beyond listening to each other, to learn how to listen to ourselves, to listen to nature, to our environment. And what I experience is that my language, so there's my listening and my language, and I can observe that my language and my listening at a specific moment are going to express a certain level or space of awareness, of consciousness. In other words, if I happen to be frustrated or angry, or if I'm joyful and happy, I will have another language and I will listen differently. So the approach I've been nourishing for many years is using our listening consciousness and our language awareness to actually regulate our consciousness. So if we're clear with our purpose, intentions, we can start to observe what language we have and what listening we are offering or not. And we can actually change our consciousness by changing our language and our listening.
That is very fair. It almost feels like you're talking about the impressions and the expression that they give birth to. When I think about this, if we are going to go into expressions and how the language that we are using, how we are listening, as Daji says that experience is the mother of all change, how does this let us, get a deeper sense of the experience we are in? Does this connect us further into it?
I think so. What it, I believe, requires is to first become aware of our different states of being. During the day, from morning to evening, we have different states of our quality of being. There are moments or times where we are very available and receptive for others. There are moments where we are less, either because we have many things to do or something is on our mind. And the first thing I believe is to accept that without judging it, welcoming that reality. And that when we start to embrace that reality, to have a form of equanimity towards these states of being which change, we can start to truly observe objectively, which means to, as I said, to not have any judgments, say, oh yes, this morning I could see I wasn't that available. I feel more available now. And when we start to be able to observe without judging, it opens a space where we can start to experiment new ways of being.
You work with a lot of different athletes. In sports, now you have to work from awareness and the experience, and now you have to add action to it. How does this transformation happen? How does it hit the ground running?
That's a great question, because especially with high-level athletes, I mean, you can imagine if you're playing in a football match for the World Cup in a final.
Of course.
The level of tension are extreme. So how do you stay aware is the question I think you're asking. And I'd like to give you a very short story of one day the world champion of karate. There are many different forms of karate. And this man, who's in our book called Master of Your Emotions, gave a testimonial around this question. I actually asked him a similar question to the one you're asking me. And his answer was beautiful, because first he paused for 1 minute, and I wondered what's happening. Did maybe ask an uncomfortable question, but he said afterwards, after a minute, he said, Mark, you can't manage it when you're on such level of intensity. And I said, wow, so well, how does it happen? How do you maintain respect? Because I told him, karate for me, it's a violent sport. For me,
of course.
But I can understand that you have a ethos in terms of respect, such as when you finish the game, before celebrating on the tatami, you bow to the other, you honor the other. So how does it happen for you? He said the question has allowed me to realize that you can't manage it in the situation, but the way you manage to sustain respect in such a high level of competition is practice. And I loved his answer, because he said, it's only when you practice it when you're not in the intensity of competition, continuously practicing. Am I staying respectful towards my opponent, towards the rules of the game? And the more you practice, the more it becomes natural. So that when you're in challenging situations, which we all live, we can stay in a space of dignity, but we need to practice. Does that make sense for you?
It does. It would make sense for you to practice more often, for it to almost become offhand. It becomes a constant in the moment. When you're talking about practice, especially in the moment, in some cases where there are athletes, let's say there's a badminton player, at times they're so tuned into the moment, they're so focused in, that before the other person hits a shot, they know where the shot will be going. They just know. So, in your own way, what would be the difference between instinct and intuition?
That's a good question. I don't know if I'll be able to answer to you with a scientific precision, but I will do my best.
Of course.
To answer you what's the discernment between both. And of course, this practice I was mentioning, we can also, for those who practice meditation, make the parallel, because the more we practice our peace of mind, the more we're going to be able to sustain it in challenging situations. And to go back to your question and the example you gave, I think the more we sustain our inner peace, in other words, the more we're able to hold that peaceful state when we are living challenges, the more we develop an intuition of what's happening here, now, and beyond. And when you look at these athletes at that level, I find it beautiful to see when a team, they're just completely attuned. And in sports, there's the word to be in the flow.
Yes.
Or I don't know actually we can also say to be in the zone.
Of course.
And that for me is a space where intuition is there, because we we're not thinking with our mind, our heads. It's not an intellectual question we're asking ourselves anymore. It's we are connected to the present moment where we just flow with it. So just like when we're driving, if we keep our head down on the road, it's going to be we're going to stay very tense all the time. But if we look in front of us, we have the perspective, and our heart knows where we're going. So that would be for me the intuition of sensing. And maybe the instincts would be more something around the animal instincts. But I haven't meditated a lot around the difference between both. But thank you. Your question is going to invite me to do so.
Your answer has left me ruminating as well. I'm happy. In a lot of different sports, when we see that they're mic'd up and everyone wants to hear what the players are saying, and you'll hear, oh, lock it in, let's go, let's lock up. Oh, you get him. But other things that are also conveyed in these, these little lens that we get into the communication that happens. There is so much that a sport and just the act of playing a sport teaches a human being. And you see it outside the arena, outside the court, outside the sphere in which they play. What are things that can translate from the field onto every other field of life, for you particularly, if you had to voice your 2 cents on it?
When I started working with the UEFA, the Union of European Football Association, who we entered into the program of social responsibility with the aim to diminish violence in football. That was the beginning. I started to hear lots of professionals, coaches, players say, well, football is a school of life. And I realize today that it's beyond football. I think many people in the sport say that. And of course, there are many reasons why people say that. And I think it's precisely because what you learn in sports, you can actually translate it into your day-to-day life. And it's going to be helpful. So I'm going to share with you, for me, the biggest gift of sports in terms of education for life. And the amazing thing is that it's for me, it's the virtue of competition. We live in a world where we can see the cost of competition. Yes, talking of not just about violence between people, but also inner violence, burnouts, and it has a high level cost. Now, as everything in life, the coin has 2 sides. There's the shadow and there's the light.
Of course.
And I think it's very important that we start to embrace more and more the light into competition. And I will share with you where, as I said, I'm seeing this happen the most. In competition, the reality is that you have an opponent.
Yes.
Or we can also say an adversary. If we look at the way in some sports, a lot in football. Football is a very challenging sport, and there's also still, unfortunately, a lot of violence. I believe it's diminishing after observing 15 years. The question is, and I think it's raising more and more, how can I win, but not at any cost?
So the ends don't justify the means.
Exactly. And unfortunately, it has been a lot like that. And not just high-level competition, but if you go, I don't know how it is in India, but I can tell you that in many countries in Europe and other continents, if you go on a weekend to see children play and parents around the football pitch, they all want their children to be Messi and Ronaldo, and they all become more than excited and sometimes violent with their language or even their being. Now, what I believe where there's the light in all of this is that the question that's coming more and more is, as I said, how can I win, but not at any costs? And that means, how can I win? In other words, do my best to be my best and respect my opponent. So rather than just imagining that I'm going to walk over my opponent, or worse, I'm going to kill him, how can I really master myself at its best and honor and respect my opponent? That virtue, when you see children and young people who learn that and they bring it home at school with their friends, with their parents, they learn how to deal with adversity. And that's, I think, the biggest skill we need in our days. It's to embrace the difference of the others and to embrace adversity, because what I wasn't taught when I was a child is that adversity is part of life. I haven't heard any human beings, even the big gurus and the very wise masters, they all share about the fact that we come here to experience adversity. So that's why sports has a tremendous power to help education to embrace this.
Even in a work environment, you can almost instantaneously make out if the person working alongside you has played sports as a child or not. It's a very distinct separation there. Egos are not there. They know how to let someone else do the work. You could say they're used to passing the ball. They know their role and they know what has to be done. It's all very beautiful things. Yet at the same time, as you were saying, there are some who are known to be bullies on the playground. They are known for their rash behavior on the court. They're marveled for that. Other people, certain tennis stars, are known for their gentleman-like qualities. So I wonder now, from the other side, talking from a kid that is watching, is the sports person aware of the traits that he is exhibiting? And should he be mindful of those?
So, two questions. Is he aware and should he be mindful of that? Yes. So in my experience, often high-level athletes are often aware, but not all the time. This dimension of self-awareness hasn't been yet very much implemented in school, in sports. Sports is still very focused on the physical dimension, the technical, the tactical, the mind for self-performance. But the attitude dimension, which we call the fifth skill, isn't yet very developed. So, of course, there are some athletes who have been blissed in their childhood to have mindful parents. So they have that awareness and sensitivity. But there are still a lot of athletes who first of all, are not aware of the impact they have on their behavior, or the impact the behavior has on the others, but also on themselves. But it's changing. I think there's more and more high-level athletes who do more personal work. When I started 15 years ago, at least in Europe, of course, it wouldn't be the same in India, but people who were already doing, for example, yoga, like Zinedine Zidane, they would not talk about it because it was not at all mainstream. There could be a lot of judgments around it or beliefs, but now this is spreading.
Yes.
We hear more and more athletes not just doing mind work for their self-performance. And to your last question, should they? I would say no doubts. Why? Because besides their own performance in their career, they inspire millions of children, millions of new generation. And if they can share their wisdom that they've acquired through their life, they will have more impacts than nobody else can on youth, more than teachers, politicians, even parents. Because they inspire. When young people listen to their stars, they will just follow them. So they have a huge potential to inspire goodness and peace.
Even now, years after Kobe Bryant died, the Mamba mentality that he inspired is still something that goes on, to be undeterring in the face of fear and adversity. And yes, there is much truth to what you say in terms of how they inspire. But I wonder now, with kids, character formation is something that happens. Now, let's say in some cases they are blessed with mindful parents. But for other kids out there who are anyways going to play a sport, they are going to run out of their houses at 5 in the evening, ready to go play. What can they do? What should they be focusing on?
Yeah, your question reminds me when I first started working with emotional well-being programs in schools. It was 1997, so more than 25 years ago.
Oh my.
And in those days, emotional intelligence was new. It was, we were not talking about emotional intelligence. And the belief in those days was that it's not school's business, it's not sports business, it's the parents' business. That was the response. Thank God, all these years later, it's spreading in the world. There's more and more schools, more and more sports institutions who are integrating meditation, mindfulness, self-awareness. The question remains, now that we accept that it's not just the parents, of course, in an ideal world, it's the parents' responsibility. But in a realistic world, most parents have not received that education themselves. Yes. So it's a societal question. And how can these young people, the example you gave, who come from school, who have not received that, and they just go and play sports, how can they be supported? So your question was actually, what could they be doing?
Yes.
I think that without having a minimum, environment which offers minimum support and goodness, it's very difficult for a young person to just decide by themselves, I am interested in wisdom or in goodness and I want to do my best. Again, thank God there are many children like that. But those who don't have that opportunity, I think it's essential, and that's why we're doing all this work, that either schools or sports environments or art environments, because art is also a very powerful way to bring this, need to offer inspiration. Because what I've learned out of all of these years is that you can teach intellectual, technical things and impose it even on children. And it will work on many, but you can't impose the curiosity to self-awareness on anybody. You can inspire, but it must come from inside. So that's why whatever approach we are bringing, I believe it needs to be inspirational so that the person, the child, the youth themselves, they say, oh, I would like to try that, or I would like to be like that.
So when you say inspire, and when you talk about the avenues which may guide a person down a rabbit hole, which leads them to their self, different forms of organizations have different forms of outreach. Whatever the sphere may be. When it comes to appearing as an avenue for something like this, how do you use education? How do you use the concept of peace, which sometimes these people may not be interested in, or they don't think that they're capable of contributing? How do you appear as an avenue to them?
So when you say, how do you appear, you mean from a general point of view? How can...
Yes. How does an organization, how does Education for Peace, the initiative, how do you appear as an avenue amongst all of the chaos or the noise around them?
Of course, your question is broad and we can answer from different avenues.
Yes.
What comes to my mind and heart is the first word is coherence. So whatever we believe that we may transmit that could be helpful or supportful, that it's essential that we are living it. And that it's not just an intellectual message which comes from the mind. And that allows the other to not just understand intellectually something, but to actually live an experience with the other where they will feel more peace. They will feel that they're not judged. They will feel the goodness that it can bring for them.
This brings to my mind the old saying that when the tide rises, all ships rise with it.
Say it again, please. When
the tide rises, all ships rise with it.
Beautiful.
I have a question of a personal kind. I hope it is not too stabbing, but when you say that you are embodying it, you have to live it. Have you been able to embody? How has the journey been for you so far? Where are you?
So I will answer you with the same content which I may this time develop that I gave at the beginning. I've been blessed to live many moments of feeling that I'm aligned with life, that I'm aligned with the I would say, origin of life, or this source.
Hmm.
And these are moments which nourish me deeply. The reality is that I'm not always in that state. And that's why I was mentioning at the beginning that I believe that it's important to accept that moving state of the qualities of being. So, having been working on this dimension of awareness for many years, and accepting the moments when I'm not in that blissful state, I've been able to observe that I don't necessarily have to be in the flow or the zone, as I was saying before, to be coherent, to be fully, I was going to say coherent, but it's not that, because it's actually, I can feel completely coherent without necessarily being in that zone. But so it's really for me about learning to listen to what's happening for me in terms of my energy, in terms of my emotions, and as I was saying, how available do I feel here and now? And that when I'm not feeling fully available, as I said, to accept it and to be coherent in that moment with what's happening with my inner state. So in other words, not pretending to be who I am not in that moment. So that for me has to do about continuously learning to be authentic with myself, with the energy I'm living at a moment and the energy of life, and to be as loyal as possible to that.
This little concert, this duet that you're doing with the world outside and your inner being, in the environment of sports, simply as a byproduct of competitiveness that does exist,
Yes.
there are a lot of moments which push people to desperation.
Yes.
Now, how do you handle desperation while having this coherence within you?
Yeah, that's why I think, sports is so interesting to work on ourselves. And as you were saying, because I only gave one dimension of the virtues, but of course there's the other dimension which you mentioned, which is teamwork. How to also work with teams. So to go to your question around desperation, which is very present in sports, from children who lose a match and they believe they're going to lose the love of their parents, to athletes who spent all their life to be champions and finish very early their careers, and they didn't reach to what they aspired. And there's many depressions. So it's a very important question you're asking. And, I think that there are so many approaches to self-awareness, to healing in our world today. And that's beautiful, because there's not, again, one answer. My answer, which is only relative to my experience, is that, as your question led from a space where I was talking about authenticity, my experience is that what leads to authenticity is our capacity to be vulnerable. If we want to go deeper in our authenticity with ourselves, we need to learn how to be vulnerable with ourselves. It's actually the same with others. If I want to be authentic with you, I'm going to have to allow myself to be vulnerable with you. Now, but what's the key? What allows vulnerability? And there is a key. Again, it's the key I'm experiencing. Many keys depending on our cultures. And that's compassion. If I feel your compassion, I will feel that I'm okay to be vulnerable with you. That means I can be authentic with you. But it's the same for each one of us with ourselves. If I am capable to give myself compassion, I will be able to go deeper in my vulnerability with myself. So I'll be able to be more authentic. And that's why there are many therapists, because we haven't learned how to give ourselves compassion. That's what therapists are trained for. But we can also learn it for ourselves. And that's where I think, what's developing in schools and sports is also going to be coming. It's learning about empathy and compassion.
There's a very interesting metaphor that talked about the relationship between anger and love. And I believe love to be the father and the mother of compassion here. So when you look at a situation with anger, it's like, it's a very narrow vision. It's a tunnel. You'll only see a very small part of the broad reality. Let's say in that moment, that is a person in front of you. You want to thrash him. But when you widen it out, then you see, oh, he's maybe your good friend. He's the godfather of your children. He's your teammate. He's all of those things as well. So, how does, if at all, how does anger play a role on the ground between athletes within a team?
So as you say, it plays a role. And I think that's the first thing to accept. Because when we want to get rid of anger and just judge it, and we enter the most difficult feelings for human beings, which is either shame or guilt. But by not rejecting anger, again being able to observe, say, oh, I see this anger. It's to understand that when we have anger, it's actually a part of us which is desperate to live some form of value which is not being expressed. So all our uncomfortable emotions, or all these parts of us which are manifesting it, it's important to understand that they are actually protecting something. And if you can welcome that anger and listen to it and disidentify, that's I think the key thing. And you know the company called Pixar, which belongs to Walt Disney, who make all these amazing movies. They did one called Inside Out.
They did.
With the 5 emotions in the mind. And when that came out, it was a celebration for me because it was a manifestation to the world that we are not our emotions. They are part of us, But when there's anger, for example, it's not all of me, even though if the anger is very intense, in the moment we lose sense of who we really are, and we believe we are that anger. So the first thing I think is to try and remember, if possible, when it happens, that yes, it's here, yes, it's happening, it's a reality now, but it's not me, it's not all of me. So to try and create a distance with that anger so we can have compassion for it and listen to this anger and to look at what value is behind all our emotions. There are values. I was extremely fortunate in my life to work with a man who was called Marshall Rosenberg.
Nice.
And he developed nonviolent communication.
Yes.
And he, I believe, brought a lot to the world of psychology, going beyond the scientific world. So that's we all can learn more about self-awareness. And one of the key things he put in light was that all of our emotions, all of them, they are an expression of an inside need which is satisfied or not. And the inside need is about values. You know, whether it's collaboration, whether it's friendship, whether it's love, but if we start to become aware of that, we can start to take our self-responsibility and understand that even though we believe that it's the others or the circumstances that are the cause of our emotions, it's actually not the reality. They are the trigger of our emotions.
Got it.
But the cause is, what are the values inside of me which are being nourished or not? And because we have different education, different journey, the same situation will trigger you differently maybe than me.
Of course. You have beautifully articulate answers. Thank you.
Thank you.
I wonder, I've been putting out this information for a kid to listen to and understand, but let's say he does pick out an emotion and traces down to his value, to his need that is now, manifesting in this form of behavior, this form of communication. What do you say to the kid that traces it down and finds that the origin of this thing is something he views as quite pitiful?
So, could you say the last thing again? Something gives you
that when this thing manifests, when a need manifests itself, if you were to trace it down and stand face to face with that need, if that need is very pitiful in your eyes, what would you say to that kid?
So, of course, if he was 7 years old or 13, I wouldn't say probably the same, but I will give you a general answer.
Sure.
So I would say that if he or her are able, for example, to see that behind that anger, there's so much sadness, for example, because the need for sharing friendship, collaboration is not at all met in this sports team. What do I do with that? What do I do with that indeed? So I would first say, let's try and first celebrate that you've been able to go inside and identify what is something so important for you. And that belongs to you. You own it. You are your own king to try and navigate your life where this need to live friendship, solidarity is so important. And realize that this team where you can't live it today is one option where it's not working, but there are so many other places. And that if you take kingship for that value so important for you, and you don't blame others, doors will open.
Mm-hmm.
Doors will open, because when we take full responsibility for our needs and values, life brings us abundance. It opens doors. When doors close, it's when we close our hearts and we start to blame others or blame life. So that's what I would have liked to share if there was a young girl or boy today living that with us today.
Good. I am happy. I feel like that kid will be at ease knowing he has the solution from A to Z. There's another question that came to my mind. We were talking about this. There are some situations where you just have to say it is what it is. Just accept it. Just move on.
Yeah.
But in some parts of the industry, I would say, you have to instill the mindset of, if I want it, I'm going to go get it. What are some areas where that mindset comes into play, where you should allow that to thrive?
It's another deep question, because the way I understand your question is, how do you keep discernment between acceptance and determination?
Yes.
And of course, that's, I'm still working on it for myself, because there are moments where I know that it's good that I keep determination. And there are moments where I know that the best is to surrender and to accept. And I don't think that there's any theoretical answer to that, at least that I can give. But what I could tell you in my experience is that checking inside, am I feeling peaceful? Whichever one I'm choosing. I can experience that determination which carries energy which has some fear in it, or anxiety, or is not a good advice. So I do believe that determination is essential, especially, if we want to contribute to a better world. The world we're living in today, if you don't have determination, you can stop straight away. There's enough to stop you.
Yes.
So I would say, listening to our hearts and making sure that we're in a space of inner peace with ourselves, but also with others, is for me the best guidance to have the discernment. So both for me are necessary, and inner peace is the discernment which allows to bring clarity, because sometimes it's not easy. It's not easy sometimes.
Well, I think something that facilitates it is the environment around it. So I wonder, now mind you, this is completely for the kid in you. But if you have to go to a training facility for a certain sport, what would be some qualities that you would want is attached with that facility?
So I want to make sure I understand your question.
Go ahead.
if the kid has to go to a sports facility to practice his sports,
Yes.
what are the qualities which
that you would want associated with that sporting facility,
environment? Okay.
with that environment.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. It could be something as simple as having a bouncing ball pit for them to unwind, whatever it is.
Yeah. Okay. So in again, through my lens, I think the first thing is that the kid, the child, the teenager feels that he's in an environment which is respectful, which means that people can be themselves because there's a space for different forms and ways of being. And to allow that, I think there's two very important components. One is that there's clarity in the boundaries, in the rules. What are our community rules so that we live in harmony together? Because we know challenges are going to be there. We're working in a sports environment, a competition, so we are all extending ourselves to be our best, so there is going to be tension.
Yes.
So if I know when I'm a child or again a teenager, and that's, if this happens, this is what's given as information on what happens, maybe as consequences, or so communication, that is a clear environment in the communication on the rules of how we live together. The second is that the sports coaches, all the people who work there, have an attitude, a quality of presence, of being with the young people where they feel respected. Even if they've done something which is in disharmony with the community, we can manage that respectfully. Even if it's difficult, the consequences, we can learn how to apply difficult consequences respectfully. So for example, that the child may feel that he maybe did something which is not appropriate, but we're not judging him as a human being.
Yes.
And the third thing I would say is to involve exercises, not just sports exercises, but also exercises which have to do with our way of being together, our way of listening to each other, our way of expressing ourselves, so that the environment becomes really a virtuous environment where I don't just learn about my sports, but I learn about life, about how to be with others. So it becomes really an enriching life experience.
I think that would be a place that a kid would really enjoy, and he would look forward to going over there. I feel so, at least. There are so many other people out in the world that are kind, that are generous, and they also want to facilitate such work. What made you take this path? What made you identify that this is a need that I want to work on? How did that transition happen from knowing that you have to do it to doing it?
Yeah. So for me, it happened at a very specific moment. over 30 years ago, I was very fortunate to become a volunteer in a suicide prevention hotline.
Mm-hmm.
So I was trained during 1 year to learn how to listen to people in distress. And I learned that actually to be able to learn how to listen to others, you first need to learn how to listen to yourself.
Mm.
You can't listen to others more or better than you can listen to yourself.
Mm.
We are the filter of listening to the others. And I had a challenging childhood, and school wasn't easy for me.
Oh, wow.
And so on one side, it's challenging, but on the other, there was a gift.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the gift was for me that when I learned how to listen to others, it changed my life, not just doing this work, but also it changed my life with my family, my children, my co-workers. I started to develop another awareness of relationship. And what struck me was, how come I didn't learn how to listen when I was at school? Because I realized that if I would have been able to learn how to listen when I was a kid, I would have had a very different relationship to education. It would have allowed me to be much more present,
Yes.
to much more focused, to have more discernment. So that's how it came to my heart to be inspired to make this awareness to as many as possible, so that children in the future also learn how to meditate, how to listen, how to become more aware of what's happening inside. So that's how it happened for me.
How beautiful. I'm happy you were able to look at the positives, at the gift associated with it. One last question before we wrap this up. We have conversed a fair bit about listening and being heard. How do you deal with it if you are not seen or you are not heard? How do you come to terms with it?
Yes, of course it happens. Because I believe it's one of the most important human needs.
Yes.
When children have the bliss to receive it as children with their parents, they have a very different journey than when they don't. So how do I deal with it when it happens? So again, the first thing is to become aware of it, to be able to observe it.
Yes.
And thanks to practicing in my life, I can see when there may be a moment where, it would have maybe been nice to live a mutual space where we see each other. And sometimes it doesn't happen. So I will give you the same answer about depression or being despaired. It's self-compassion. It's to realize that to welcome maybe the sadness or the grieving, and to acknowledge it. And again, to realize that it's not the only situation in life where I can live that. I grieve that in this specific situation, maybe with this person or this environment, it hasn't happened. But I give myself self-compassion. And I will finish by giving you and the people who will listen what has been one of the most beautiful ways to understand how we can give ourselves self-compassion. if I am grieving, for example, a situation where I would have liked that we or would have shared mutual recognition, being seen by each other, and it didn't happen, and I'm in a space of sadness or grieving, how do I find a space of self-compassion? And a very powerful way to do it is I imagine a friend who is living the same. And I ask myself, how would I act? What would I tell that friend? Would I go and put my arm around him? Would I tell him some kind words? And I take that into my heart for myself.
What a beautiful way of practicing compassion.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Mark.
Oh.
This has been beautiful. Thank you once again.
Thank you. It's been a beautiful moment for me too.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of GhanaCast. Do subscribe to GhanaCast on YouTube, Instagram, and Spotify. Until the next episode, from the entire GhanaCast team, namaste and goodbye.